Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Jayden.reads. Today I'm going to be talking about The Shining, a very spooky book by Stephen King, which is perfect for October, only I hated it. Kind of. Hate is a strong word, but really didn't like it. So this video I'm going to be reviewing The Shining, and I'm also going to be talking about Stephen King and his writing style, his plot ideas, and why I will not be reading any more books by him. I originally wanted to make this video like a reading vlog and vlog my experience, but I was only able to access the book online through the Libby app, so I had to read it on my phone, which is also what I use to film my videos, and so I couldn't necessarily like film myself reading because I was reading on my phone and also use my phone to film, you know? So it's not really a reading vlog, but when I first intended to make it a reading vlog, I took some footage at Spirit Halloween. If you guys don't know what that is, it's just like this like kooky little Halloween store. My husband and I went on October 1st because we wanted to do something spooky every day of Halloween. And so, or not every day of Halloween, Halloween's only one day, but every day of October because Halloween is like our favorite holiday. So anyway, I have some footage from Spirit that I will go ahead and like link here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and throw that in so that you can see my vlog footage of a vlog that doesn't exist. Okay, so this year they made some It stuff. And this disgusting, horrible movie is what inspired this week's reading vlog. Yay, but also boo. I know. Oh my gosh! Oh, that really got me. That really got me. I don't know why, but I'm really not feeling it right now, but Quinn is gonna make me go through this house.
I am.
You go first.
Nope.
Please.
Nope.
I'm not going first.
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
I want to go first.
It's okay. It's okay.
I don't want to go first.
It's okay.
No.
It's alright.
Something's gonna go bad.
Don't make me turn this car around.
You go first. Can you go first?
It's alright. It's okay. You can do it.
I know something's gonna come out. Please.
I believe in you. Dun dun.
Stop.
Dun dun. You have to show them the actual.
Oh yeah. It's like a little underwater world. I'm so uncomfortable and I don't know why. Something's coming out of that 100% over there. Okay, you go first. There's a shark.
There's a shark. You have to show them.
Oh. I don't know if it's just supposed to be like
There's a
a
squid.
thing.
Come on. It's okay.
No.
It's okay. We're almost out. It's right there.
Okay. Whew. I don't know why that scared me so bad.
Everybody has good childhood memories of fun. That's why we follow me. I promise we will give you some new memories you will never.
You know, I see so many people come in here, but I've never seen any of them leave.
This lovely lady too. Anyway, let's get into the review. Hopefully this will be a non-spoiler review. It's kind of hard for me to review this book and talk about the problems that I had with it without it being spoilery. So I'm not going to try to give away unnecessary details, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not going to talk about everything. I'm not going to necessarily talk about the ending or like important things that you need to know. But in order for me to describe what bothered me so deeply about this book, I will need to touch on specific things that happen in the book, obviously. So if you haven't read this book and you want to, but you still want to watch this review, I guess just use your discretion. And I will try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. Okay, so to start us off, I want to talk about why I chose to read this book and kind of my overall feelings on Stephen King. And then I promise we'll get into The Shining, but this is all important for you to understand why I have the feelings that I do. So I never read any Stephen King books before, and a couple of weeks ago one of my really good friends, like one of mine and my husband's really good friends, I guess, asked us to come over and watch it. And I had never seen it, but I thought, okay, like, it's Halloween. Oh my gosh, I keep saying that. No, it's October. And like I said, we were trying to do something spooky every day of October, just try to get in like the Halloween mood. So anyway, we went to his house and we watched it. And for those of you who have seen, I hate that it's called It because it makes talking about it so difficult. But for those of you who have seen it, and even if you haven't, obviously you know it's a story about this killer clown who preys on children. And I already didn't really like that premise because I'm a very big advocate for children, and every single job I've had has been working with children to preserve their rights, and especially the rights of children who have been abused or who have special needs. And so children are a pretty sore spot for me, and I don't necessarily appreciate that a horror movie or novel would center around harming children. I just think that's inappropriate to begin with. But our friend really wanted us to watch this movie and he kept talking about how good it was, and so I was like, I'll give it a try. We watched the movie. Kind of the whole point is that the clown, Pennywise, he wants to eat the kids, but he wants them to be as scared as possible before he eats them. And so he'll kind of torment them, like he'll show up in their lives just unexpectedly. He will like manifest their worst fears. So like say that you were afraid of spiders. Then he would turn into this giant spider or a bunch of little spiders and have them crawl all over you, or just he would do things to really freak you out. And then he would just keep reappearing over and over and over again, and it would kind of get like more intense, and it would build up to the point where he felt like you were afraid enough that he could eat you, because the more afraid you were, the tastier you were. It's still a cool idea and something, that I can maybe get behind. Like, okay, like fear is gonna make the kids taste better to this killer clown. He's already evil, so like the fear thing isn't that far-fetched. But these are not your traditional kids. No, these are kids who are afraid of bullies who use knives, pocket knives, to carve their names into children's stomachs. These are kids who hate their fathers because their fathers physically abuse them, and so they murder their fathers. These are kids who are these adorable, put together little girls who are being abused by their fathers, and their father sexually abusing them is their fear. That, to me, was so inappropriate and over the top, and I just felt like it was completely unfair. One, because this book was marketed as like kind of, or at least the movie I felt like was marketed as like this cheap thrill of a clown killing kids. And going into it, I had no idea that it was going to deal with topics like sexual assault. And there are people who have experienced something that horrific, and going to see that movie could be very triggering for them, and they could have absolutely no idea because that wasn't marketed at all. And I don't think that that's fair or appropriate. Additionally, if Stephen King is just trying to capitalize on the fear of children, why not pick something as benign as spiders? Like I said, I mean, the killer is a clown. That's like a classic child fear. So are spiders, snakes, like things like that. But to capitalize on bullies that physically harm children or fathers that sexually assault their daughters, that to me just seems like a cheap shot. Like, we're talking about fear, and so he takes the things that are most terrifying about our world and uses them for a clown to impersonate, which is just completely inappropriate. If he wanted to discuss big topics like sexual assault, I think that should have been made known. And I think that is a serious topic and something that should not be made light of as a trick to get you to feel more scared for this girl. I think it should be respected and treated for how it is. A complete atrocity and a huge crime, and something that people should go to jail for. It should not be something that a clown can impersonate to scare a little girl. So anyway, as you can tell, I have very intense feelings about it. And not only that, there's like this scene at the end where all the kids are in Pennywise's lair. One of the boys kisses the girl. There's like one girl out of the friend group. And my friend was like, oh, I wonder if this is in reference to that scene. And if any of you have read it or read a synopsis of it, you know that in Stephen King's book edition, there is a pretty intense section that takes place in Pennywise's lair after the kids are trying to leave, and it involves physical intimacy between all members of the friend group, which is like 8 boys and 1 girl. I'm not afraid of using these words of what's actually going on, but I don't know if that's like appropriate on YouTube or if it's something that like this channel or this video will get like blocked for saying, if that makes any sense. So I'm not going to use the actual words, but yes, they all engage in a physical act together. And they're like 11 years old. And that also is completely inappropriate because one, they're children, and two, they're in like a life-threatening situation. Three, they're in the sewers. And four, this girl's dad just tried to violate her. And now she's willing to interact in this way with all of the members of her peer group. It's just stupid and doesn't make any sense. And anyway, I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, and if you don't know to what I'm referring, Google it and you will find out. After watching this movie and having that discussion with my friend, I realized that I felt like Stephen King was not that talented as an author or creator. I felt like he purposely preyed on heavy topics to create cheap thrills, which is stupid and inappropriate, and that he exploited children in his works. But it was the only media by Stephen King that I had consumed. And so I thought, you know, I need to be fair. I need to give this guy an actual chance. I need to not only watch this movie and read like the entire synopsis of it on Wikipedia because I'm completely disgusted, I need to actually read one of Stephen King's novels and see like, was it just a fluke? Is that his normal writing style? Is he truthfully as sex obsessed as I believe him to be? Is he truly as exploitative of children as I believe him to be? Is he a better author than I'm giving him credit for? Or is he the exact person that I'm imagining in my head? So I did some research and I watched a lot of reviews of other booktubers who like to read Stephen King or who have read Stephen King books. After hearing their suggestions and reading a lot of different synopses, I chose to read The Shining by Stephen King because it sounded the most interesting to me. And if you don't know what The Shining is about, just basically, there is this really grand hotel called, this angle is so weird because my hand is like barely like coming in. Anyway, there's this grand hotel in Colorado. Yes, in Colorado. I don't know why I blinked right there. And it's called the Overlook Hotel. And it's up in the mountains where it gets really cold and it snows a lot. And so this hotel is really prominent. It's like really expensive to stay there, and there's a lot of like really famous guests that come, but it definitely has an off season, which is October through April or May or somewhere around there, you know, somewhere in the spring. And it has this off season because it snows so much to the point where the hotel is usually snowed in and people wouldn't be able to leave. They wouldn't be able to get back down the mountain, so it's not safe for guests. But as it is this big hulking building in the middle of these mountains, it still needs to be maintained during the winter months. Like the boiler still needs to run, things still need to be taken care of so that the hotel doesn't just like shut down and like fall apart because of these storms. Your main character, Jack Torrance, is this man who used to teach at this prep school. And it's alluded to from the very beginning that he is like a raging alcoholic and that he had problems at his old job and that he was fired. And so he's in desperate need of a new job. And he has this friend named Al Shockley who has connections with the Overlook Hotel. And he's able to get Jack the job of being like the winter caretaker. So Jack is going to like go to the Overlook and live there over the winter and, like I said, be the one to like turn on the boiler. I mean, that's kind of like the most important thing that he does. But when Jack accepts this job, it's not only him that has to go live at the Overlook for the winter. He's married and has a child, so his wife Wendy and his son Danny must also go spend the winter at this hotel. And when he's having his like introductory interview kind of with the manager, Mr. Ullman of the Overlook Hotel, Mr. Ullman is like, hey, just so you know, like you may not want to bring your family to the hotel with you over the winter. And Jack's like, why wouldn't I want to do that? That's like 1,000,000 months for me to be without them and then I'd be the only one in the hotel and that sounds terrible. Like I'm going to bring my family with me. And Mr. Ullman says, well, our previous caretaker brought his family up here. So he brought his wife and his 2 daughters up here. And after a while, when he got snowed in and he was super isolated, he ended up murdering his family and taking his own life. There's kind of like a bad history here of people who stay as the winter caretaker when they bring other people with them, so you may not want to. And Jack is like, oh, pish posh, that won't happen to me. What an idiot. As you can tell from just that little explanation, something is going to happen and people are probably going to die because people die at this hotel when they're snowed in. So anyway, it's an interesting premise, right? I mean, one of my favorite books is And Then There Were None, which I mention in every single video because I can't get over it. But anyway, And Then There Were None is so compelling to me because it's a group of people who are on an island and they can't leave. And so when murders begin happening, it seems more threatening because you don't just have the obvious choice of like leave and get out. And so I really liked that about this setup as well, that like obviously bad things are going to start happening, and in a lot of times in horror we think the characters make really stupid decisions, but I was like, you know what, maybe I can justify more of their decisions because they are stuck at this hotel. And so it's not like, why don't you just leave? It's like, well, we can't. Like, we can die in the hotel or we can go out into these like snowstorms and die there. Like, pick your poison, you know? So I thought it sounded really interesting and I started reading it. And at first I was like, I was wrong about Stephen King. This is a very good book. Because if you know anything about Stephen King, he takes a heck ton of time to develop his characters up front. And any review that I've read by Stephen King, or not read by Stephen King, but read about Stephen King or seen about Stephen King, like if you look up other booktubers on Stephen King, they'll all say the same thing. That like the first half, or maybe a little bit less, but a huge chunk of the first part of the story is just introducing you to the characters and getting to know them and their backstories and why they act the way they do. And so I was like, you know what? This is pretty good. Like, I'm starting to connect with these characters. It's alluded to from the very beginning that Jack is going to kind of start like going crazy and that he's going to be the one who's harming his family and all these things. And so you know that about Jack, and you know a lot of things about his backstory that make you really not like him, but he's also so good at rationalizing and making you feel like, oh, maybe he's got a point. Maybe he's not as bad as he says he is. There's this really excellently written segment, I feel like, when Jack he's putting shingles on the roof. That's like one of the things that he needs to do over the winter. And he stumbles upon this wasp's nest. And I won't talk too much about it because, like I said, I don't want to give away spoilers. But anyway, he's looking at the wasps and he starts reflecting and he says things like, wasps were built by God, just like everything else. Like, I was built by God, wasps were built by God, but wasps have stingers, you know, and they sting people just because, and they sting people because they're angry, but they were created by God, so that must mean that they're not bad. Like, they're still fulfilling God's purposes, and so even when they hurt people, it can't be all that bad. And that's like a really rough, like, summary of what he was actually saying, but he was kind of defending himself and his own actions in that way by saying, like, I was created by God, I do bad things sometimes, but like doesn't mean I'm a bad person. We all do bad things. It's really interesting, like getting this deep dive into him, into his character, and you really feel like you start to understand him. And so then when he starts to unwind and go crazy, it's like disappointing and like hard and turbulent because you're like, oh, like I hated you, but I liked you for a minute. And like, why can't you just be good? And like, I don't know. So that is really interesting. And I would say that's really well done. This is where I think Stephen King completely falls short in not only The Shining, but also It. And like I said, I haven't consumed any more Stephen King media, so I can't say for other stories. But I was incredibly disappointed because, like I said, we spent eons building these characters up and getting to know them. And when it comes to Wendy, Jack's wife, like the number one thing that we know about Wendy, number one thing, is that her son is the most important thing to her and that she would do anything for him. She is an incredible mother. Partway through the story, something happens to Danny. And I don't want to get into spoilers, so I won't say what, but something happens where he starts to get bruises on his neck. And it looks as if someone has tried to strangle him. And Jack in the past has been violent against Danny. There's nobody else at this hotel. Jack has been violent against Danny before. Wendy comes to the only conclusion that she possibly could, and that is that Jack has hurt Danny, and that Jack has been the one like strangling Danny. She freaks out and she takes Danny upstairs and she's like, how could you? And all of these things. And so then they go upstairs. Danny starts to explain there are some supernatural elements in this book. And so he starts to relate that this was a supernatural encounter. This was not something that happened between him and his father. Wendy gets that explanation. Jack gets that explanation. They put Jack, their 5-year-old son, okay, their 5-year-old son down to sleep, and he's sleeping in the room next to them on this bed because they pulled his bed into their room because obviously he's scared. They start talking, and Wendy is like, hey, like, I'm gonna take Danny to the doctor tomorrow. Like, something choked him. He has bruises all over his neck. He says it wasn't you. Even if it's something supernatural, our son almost died. Like, I'm getting out of here and I am taking care of my son. Jack starts to be like, no, Wendy, you're such a party pooper. Don't do that. Don't leave the hotel. I need you here. And she's like, well, frankly, Jack, like, I don't really care because our son almost died. You know, she's in keeping with her character. And Jack, who is slowly losing it, is trying to keep her in the hotel and trying to keep her from leaving. And so annoying, he tries to seduce her. And he does this by, like, talking to her and slowly unbuttoning her shirt and then reaching his hand in and touching certain areas and stroking and then going down lower on her. And all of these things. And as Wendy is talking about the life of her son being on the line, his touch is apparently so soothing, so just, ugh, I don't even have words for it because it's disgusting. But she's just so taken by his touch that she completely forgets about her son and that he almost died and that he's literally 5 feet away from her, and she does it with her husband. Stupid. What mom would have, don't want to say the big word in case I get in trouble, but would have you know what with her insane husband when her child has almost died and is 5 feet away from her? No one. Find me one mom that would do that and she should go to prison. Just kidding, that is so over the top. But honestly, that's just not realistic. It's not realistic for a person in general, and it is for sure not realistic for Wendy. Because this entire time, we've been talking about how dedicated Wendy is to her son, and I'm pretty sure that the life of your son trumps physical intimacy every time. So I hated that. And not only that, that continues throughout the book. Wendy is this strong, independent woman, except for when it comes to Jack's sex drive. Then all of a sudden, she just collapses. And she can't go on. She has to deliver for him. Which makes no sense because he's a maniac. And like, no person in their right mind would be turned on in that moment or want... It's just so annoying. And so this led me even more to the conclusion that I'd already started to come up with, that Stephen King is just a gross, sex-obsessed man. And that being said, I don't know Stephen King. I've never talked to him. And so I don't want to make assumptions that are unfair or act like I know him when I don't. But honestly, if you're going to include these details in your book and you're not sex-obsessed, take a writing class. Find something better to write about. Like, you're an idiot. And I'm getting so heated. Later in the book, or throughout the book, like I said, there are some supernatural things going on. And so at different times, Jack and Danny both stumble upon bodies that are like these ethereal bodies, and both times they're found in a bathtub. And that's significant for other reasons. Danny is the first person to find somebody in a bathtub, and he finds this woman, and she happens to be naked, which, whatever, I guess she's in a bathtub. But he's a 5-year-old boy describing seeing a naked, like, gross woman in a bathtub. And what does he describe? Her chest, her body parts, some hair that lives in her lower regions. You think a 5-year-old boy who sees a dead woman in a bathtub is gonna be like, oh wow, those plump things are floating? Heck no, okay? It's just ridiculous. He would never think that. I would never think that. If you saw a dead person in a bathtub, why would you care at all about what individual erotic body parts are doing? You wouldn't. And then later, when Jack goes to see somebody in this body, or somebody in this bathtub, it's a man, and what does he immediately describe? That person's reproductive organs. And it's just like, why are these people idiots? Why would we focus on that right now when we are seeing somebody dead in a tub in a hotel where we are supposed to be alone? Do we care that they have anatomical features? No, we just don't even want them to be there. And that's not the only time. Over and over and over again in this book, we got these descriptions that came out of nowhere where it was like something really terrifying was happening, but ooh, we need to talk about the fact that we're seeing somebody's special parts. Like, not relevant, not what I signed up for. This is the most classless book I've ever read. And yeah, I just was not impressed with that. I just was really upset that the characters contradicted themselves so much in these ways, like Wendy just being so willing to bend at every whim of Jack's. Like, it just didn't make any sense. And I felt the same way when I watched It and learned about Bev and the sewer scene, the child sewer scene in the book. It was just like, you have spent, you know, It is like 1,300 pages. You have spent a chunk of this book describing how headstrong this girl is, how smart she is, how resilient, how independent, and all these things. And you really think she would compromise herself in that way? Give me a break. It just does not make sense. It is not in line with these characters. Women do not just lay down for any man who wants us. That's just disgusting, and that is so disloyal to the character you have created. And if you, Stephen King, are going to spend a good 100, 200, 300, 400 pages giving character backstory and building up these characters, you better not contradict them. But you do every time, because when it comes to women, I guess we just lay down for the whims of men. But actually, we don't. So that was a pretty intense review. Those are my biggest problems. There were a lot of other things. Stephen King includes a lot of details that are just not necessary to the book and just add a lot of fluff and make it way longer than it needs to be. He's not very good at pacing. This book had a lot more buildup than it needed. I already knew it was going to be scary from the beginning. I just wanted to get into the action at the end. It was extremely gory when we actually got into the action, which I discovered is something I'm really uncomfortable with. And I like things more like actually Woman in White or Dracula, where it's like, yes, there are threats and they're there and they're scary, but we don't need to, like, those threats in and of themselves are so creative and well put together that we don't need to focus on the gore that they produce. Because that's just cheap and that's poor writing in my opinion. And not only that, but in this book, like I said, there were supernatural elements involved, and so a lot of times when these supernatural entities would be like speaking with the characters, it was kind of weird. They would just like talk to their minds, I guess. Those parts were written in parentheses, which really threw me off and took me out of the story because it just like is not a normal thing to have in books. And those were really confusing as well because they hardly ever said things that made sense. And sometimes there'd be parentheses within parentheses, or there'd be parentheses and then another parentheses and then another parentheses, and they're all talking about different things. And it's like, are these thoughts the characters are having, or is this a supernatural? Like, I don't know. So all in all, it wasn't really well written. And I know that this just seems like a huge bash, and I'm really sorry about that. I just have some really strong feelings, and I'm really upset, I guess, that so many people love Stephen King and like read his books and act as if he's amazing just because he's famous. Because I frankly think he's not very talented as a writer. I think his works are very exploitative of children and women. And I don't think that they're appropriate, and I don't think that he deserves the praise that he gets. In a lot of reviews that I watched and listened to, a lot of people said, I picked up this book, wasn't interested in the synopsis, wasn't impressed by it, and I only read it because it was written by Stephen King and because I'd heard things about him, and I probably gave it a higher rating than I really would have given it had it not been written by Stephen King, just because I was influenced by the author. And I think at the end of the day, that shows that he's not all that great. And so personally, I will not read any more Stephen King. I totally get it. If you love him, if he's your favorite, if that's your thing, cool. Like, we all have different tastes. I'm sure some of my tastes are different than yours. But I just felt like it was kind of important to get my thoughts and views out there, because the only things that I ever hear about him are that people love him or that people will read his works just because he's famous. And I figured we might as well get some real discussion going on Stephen King and his works. So that has been my review of The Shining and Stephen King as a whole. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be seeing you guys soon in a new upcoming video. Thanks guys, we'll talk later. Bye.